Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. This is lecture 2 in the health benefits of fasting. And we had left off on talking about some of the mechanisms by which fasting helps improve our health at the cellular level. And we said that from here on out, inshallah, we will look at specific topics within health, such as weight loss, such as cardioprotective effects, and so forth. And I've already in lecture 1 given you the sources that I will be using for this material. So, one of the most significant benefits of fasting, especially when we don't gorge ourselves at night, but just eat normally, is weight loss. Intermittent fasting has been shown to produce a weight loss of 3 to 8% over 3 to 24 weeks, 4 to 7% reductions in waist circumference, and very significantly, loss of visceral fat. We lose a lot of the belly fat and the fat around our internal organs without gross loss of lean body mass. That's very important. Calorie restriction, if we were to go on a very strict diet but not fast, has been shown to reduce weight, of course, but we also lose muscle. Fasting, even when we take in the same calories as normally, but we go for prolonged periods without eating, actually helps us lose fat and lose the right kind of fat, the visceral fat, the fat that is around our internal organs, because that is the harmful fat, and maintain lean body mass. And of course, fasting should also lead to some calorie reduction as well to further help us with weight loss. One of the things that happens with fasting is that we have lower insulin levels and higher growth hormone levels when we fast, and we increase the amount of norepinephrine. You may know it as noradrenaline or adrenaline. And all of these increase the breakdown of body fat and facilitate its use for energy. Insulin helps us store and make fat. Lower insulin levels counteract that. So, short-term fasting actually increases our metabolic rate because insulin levels go down, we have higher growth hormone levels and higher epinephrine, norepinephrine, and the metabolic rate actually can increase by anywhere from 3% to 14%, helps us burn more calories. So in other words, fasting works on both sides of the calorie equation. We boost our metabolic rate and we reduce the amount of food that we eat. And so we end up with the very significant advantage of a bit of weight loss, and even modest weight loss can go a very long way toward improving our health. Now, diabetes. Well, let's look at this direct quote from the source, Aging Research Reviews. Put simply, fasting can prevent and cure the disease in rodent models of type 2 diabetes. You can't really have a stronger statement than that. The cellular and molecular mechanism by which intermittent fasting prevents and reverses diabetes involves increased sensitivity of insulin receptor signaling so that insulin more readily stimulates glucose uptake by muscle and liver cells. And you know that diabetes type 2 is in significant part, due to a loss of insulin sensitivity. Diabetes type 1, juvenile diabetes, we can't make the insulin. Type 2, adult onset diabetes, which is the most common type, is because of our sedentary lifestyle, our continuous high blood sugar, our continuous high insulin levels, we lose the sensitivity to insulin. Fasting increases our insulin sensitivity. And we will talk about some of these internal cellular signaling mechanisms, such as something known as mTOR signaling, improved mitochondrial function. Again, the mitochondria are the energy factories and storehouses of the cell, and stimulation of mitochondrial biogenesis. We make more mitochondria. The cell becomes a more efficient energy machine because of fasting, and these things can prevent and cure diabetes type 2 in fasting rodent models. Now, this mTOR complex, that's not something you really need to know about, but I just want us to have a flavor of how complex the cell is. This is the mTOR C1. mTOR is considered one of the master regulators of cell growth and metabolism, and there are multiple mTOR complexes. Complex 1 has 5 or 6 proteins that interact together. Complex 2 has another 5 or 6 proteins that interact together. And when you look at the dizzying array of chemical pathways that the mTOR complexes regulate, the complexity inside the cell is absolutely astounding. The number of chemical pathways that are not only interrelated, but that have very complex feedback loops, so that as something increases, you get a feedback loop that then makes it decrease to a reasonable level and so forth, is really beyond our capacity now to simulate, even with the highest level supercomputers. We are the number of variables and links and permutations is beyond our simulation capacity on the large scale. We can simulate limited bits and pieces of pathways, which we are still trying to uncover at this stage. But between mTOR complex 1, mTOR complex 2, there are so many interrelated protein, enzymatic pathways that it is quite remarkable. And we know that fasting probably works by making some changes to the gene expression and function of the mTOR complexes. So from the Authority Nutrition source, it really breaks it down nicely, the Chris Gunner's article that I mentioned initially. Anything that reduces insulin resistance will help lower blood sugar and protect against type 2 diabetes. Intermittent fasting has been shown to have major benefits for insulin resistance and lead to a very impressive reduction in the blood sugar levels. And in human studies on intermittent fasting, fasting blood sugar reduces by 3 to 6%, and fasting insulin reduces by 20 to 30%. And so you can see that we are able to get along with a much lower level of insulin in our blood. We don't stress the pancreas to keep churning out insulin that our cells are resistant to, and our cells become more sensitive to this lowered level of insulin. And one study in diabetic rats showed that intermittent fasting protects against kidney damage, which is one of the worst complications of diabetes. And what this implies is that intermittent fasting may be highly protective for people who are at risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And as I said, in rodent models, it has been shown to even cure the disease. And again, from still on the diabetes topic, from another one of our sources, studies have reported greater reductions in insulin resistance versus CER. CER would be a continuous energy restriction. That would be comparing fasting to just being on a strict diet but not fasting. So fasting is not just about the calorie restriction. It is about going long periods without food, and insulin resistance reduces more with fasting than with taking the equivalent amount of calories but by a strict diet. And so intermittent fasting, in fact, exhibited a 25% greater reduction in insulin resistance compared to just a strict diet. And these differences occurred despite comparable reductions in body fat. So you can lose the same amount of weight on a strict diet as with fasting, but it turns out that human data has shown pretty conclusively that fasting gives us a much better edge in terms of reducing our insulin resistance. Now, cardioprotective effects. Fasting also has very significant effects on our heart health. And again, you see the source where the quote comes from. Profound cardioprotective effects of fasting have been documented in studies of rats and mice. And in fact, in a model of myocardial infarction is heart attack. Rats that had been maintained on alternate day fast for 3 months prior to a heart attack exhibited a reduced myocardial infarct size. So when you tie off the artery of a rat, and I sincerely apologize to the many of us who are certainly concerned or opposed to animal experimentation like this, but what they do is they occlude the coronary artery of a rat and give the rat a heart attack. And rats that have been fasting have a significantly reduced infarct size. That means that the amount of cell death in the heart is much less, and the at-risk area known as the penumbra zone is reduced by about 75% compared to rats that just eat normally. So you see that not only would fasting help prevent heart attacks, but when someone suffers a heart attack, the fasting regimen actually helps protect the heart against that damage. And the survival and recovery from the same source of heart function can actually also occur when rats begin fasting after the heart attack. And so when rats began fasting after the heart attack, 75% of the rats survived during an 8-week heart attack period, compared to less than 25% that maintained a normal diet after the heart attack. And so that should be a clue to the very significant cardioprotective effects of fasting. And why is that? Well, fasting reduces serum cholesterol, reduces triglycerides, and it reduces a lot of significant markers of oxidative stress. You know that oxidative stress, which are free radicals damaging our cells, all of these different markers of oxidative stress and markers of inflammation, inflammatory change in our cells, all of these are shown to be reduced by fasting. And the reductions in weight loss that we've been talking about, reductions in body fat, reductions in serum cholesterol and triglycerides, very, very significant reductions in these parameters when we fast. And so fasting not only now helps us reduce weight, helps us counteract diabetes, but it is very significant for keeping our hearts healthy, and God forbid, when our hearts are not healthy, like with a heart attack, protecting our hearts. And again, from this source, when initiated in 2-month-old rats, fasting protects the heart against the normal age-related increase in inflammation, oxidative stress, and fibrosis. Please forgive the Toshiba warning signal here. Let me just turn that off. And so how does this happen? Well, normally we have, as we age, increases in what are known as extracellular signal-related kinases, phosphoinositol kinases, STAT3, that's known as a signal transducer and activator of transcription factor, and all of these increases were prevented by alternate day fasting. So I mention this again just to give us a flavor for the complexity that lies beneath the surface. We are entirely unaware of the very complicated factory that churns in each one of our billions of cells. In humans, again, these things are very easy to measure in animals under controlled circumstances. We believe that this also occurs in humans, and we know that on the bigger level, the grosser level, hypertension, low heart rate variability, insulin resistance, and hyperlipidemia are all associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and fasting reduces all of these things. In fact, people who don't have much heart rate variability, the heart is always beating at the same rate, are at higher risk for heart attack. Fasting increases our heart rate variability, reduces our insulin resistance. And finally, from this source, it's known that various health markers, risk factors that are associated with either an increased or decreased risk of heart disease, we have now mapped those factors, like blood pressure, total and LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, inflammatory markers, blood sugar levels. We know from animal studies and from some human data that all of these risk factors are really improved by fasting. On the bottom line, studies show that intermittent fasting can improve numerous risk factors for heart disease, such as blood pressure, cholesterol, triglycerides, and inflammatory markers. And we've talked a little bit about the intracellular chemistry behind this. In the next episodes, inshallah, we will continue this journey into other protective effects and health benefits of fasting. Assalamu alaikum.